Our third speaker then is Rafico Ruiz, who is a PhD candidate in communication studies and the history and theory of architecture, and who studies the relationships between mediation and social space, particularly in the Arctic and subarctic, the cultural geography of natural resource engagements, and the philosophical and political stakes of infrastructural and ecological systems. He's the co-editor and co-founder of Sea Change, a journal of art communication and technology, and reviews editor at Culture Machine.
Great. Thanks, Maggie, and thanks for organizing this series of meetings. It's an opportunity. I'm really happy to be part of the discussion. So as Maggie said, my name is Rafico Ruiz, and I'm a PhD candidate here in McGill Communication Studies and Architecture. So this odd combination of disciplines is, partly the result of my having what could be, I guess, described as an unruly background in cultural studies, so this also means that I'm pursuing what McGill is called an ad personam degree. That is, a degree determined on an individual basis. While on the surface this may seem like a terribly neoliberal form of organization within higher education, with individual choice governing and trumping established scholarly agendas, I think it's also a subtle reminder of the importance of the question that we're here to discuss: why the humanities matter. Many of you at McGill have probably never heard of this nebulous ad personam degree status. Is this true? Show of hands. Have heard of it? Good now. This dual disciplinary identity in countless social and scholarly contexts has meant, at least on the surface, giving off a certain degree of uncertainty when it comes to my chosen disciplinary expertise. So in true Kierkegaardian fashion, it comes in either or bind, either a media studies scholar or an architectural historian, which of course extends into neither nor territory as well, particularly when it comes to job search committees and departmental requirements. So yes, the ad personams exist. And for those of you at McGill who thought that interdisciplinary research was hard to come by, well, yes, it's true. You just might be right. The form outlining the long list of documentary and administrative requirements to do an ad personam opens with the ominous words, in very rare circumstances. The first words. This is, of course, tantamount to a cautionary road sign blinking, supervisee and supervisors beware. Interdisciplinary administrative headaches lie ahead. One of my supervisors, Dan Barnett, is here. Yet for all its cautionary and real pitfalls, the ad personam exists. And I don't want to make too much of its ontological status, but just the same, its very existence represents an important crossing, or better, the potential for the act of crossing within the university itself. This form of crossing allows for the value of the ad personam to emerge. As a conferral of a kind of contingent or open disciplinarity, it places an emphasis on scholarly practices over scholarly disciplines. In other words, here is the inquiry at hand that is shaping the degree's hand. While my crossing took place within the humanistic enterprise, these crossings could, in theory, take place, literally create a real space for crossing from the social to the natural sciences and beyond. You might be asking yourselves here, what sort of dissertation project could possibly emerge from a psychologist in thinking through mechanical engineering? Or even what sorts of qualifications and such as you can have to be able to operate in such different disciplines. At base is the question of a university subject's agency. A great deal of scholarship over the past 3 decades, both in and on the margins of the humanities in particular, has been working to expand what we consider the limits and the limitations of the known subject, from post-colonial and gender studies to science and technology studies and media studies. As the philosopher Rossi Braidotti contends, quote, the question of what figure of the human is implied in the practice of the humanities has emerged as a central concern. While I would here like to exceed the language-based inquiry of the humanities and its creation of a stratified common ground for humanistic inquiry, the unit of the human, of the rational subject, is still very much a trope in forms of discourse that touch on the normative cultural identity of humanities. And here I'm thinking of the work of Martha Nussbaum in particular. So to varying degrees, the post-humanities project, that is, one that works through the ethical and political critiques of humanism, such as its focus on the rational human subject, is one that has been taken on by an important limited number of scholars within what could be thought of as more firmly entrenched disciplinary formations, such as English, history, or philosophy. Yet thinking beyond the scale of the human is also one of the interfaces at which the humanities today, if we can essentialize such a field of agency, is working as well. With the spectacular, if still to be negotiated, emergence of the digital humanities and the environmental humanities attesting to its ongoing evolution. What I'm working my way towards here is the idea that the humanities can be the de jure originary and grounding vanguard for an expansion of human agency within the university. And this through an expansion of the scholarly practices we think across and with, as well as act through. These so often marginalized studies, whether feminist, post-colonial, or gender over the past 30 years, and there's a growing collection of hybrid forms of scholarship over the past 5, whether digital or environmental, are expressions of the potential inquiry that is at hand in this very act of crossing that is so particularly ours in the humanities. The malleability of both the university subject and the limits of human agency within the humanistic project are so fundamental because they, in a way, are the predicate for the possibility of the ad personam. In other words, for us, I think inquiry can start to shape both, start to renegotiate the terms by which we undertake our research. This is not so much a matter of self-identification, of claiming to be a post-humanist or medievalist. And it's also not a mere matter of institutional consolidation in temporary configurations of so-called interdisciplinarity in centers or institutes, or for that matter, the building inside the instrumental design of research grants that draw on distinct forms of disciplinary expertise. Rather, I think it's of paramount importance to figure out how the humanities matter, which is, I think, what we're doing here. That is, how they are and can be a situated set of social practices that are responsive to societal questions and formations at hand. In very rare circumstances, as the ad personam document contends, the humanities at McGill hold the a priori possibility to let inquiry precede the human subject. The question at hand, then, is that of what we can hold in common beyond the human. In other words, the humanities matter through the choices we make, both in how we go about practicing them and thinking about them. That they have a fundamental institutional agency is far from a given. That's what we're talking about here, after all. Determining that agency set of practices and subjects across institutional pressures, such as financing and administrative networks, including the consolidation of support staff, I might add, is the task both to and at hand, in here and now. A few years ago, a colleague, Caroline Ben, and I organized a roundtable discussion for Sea Change, the journal that Maggie mentioned, that we co-edited here at McGill. The roundtable actually took place in this very room. And the theme of the roundtable was that of universities, futures, and there was no question mark after that thematic. So we convened 3 participants, one of whom was Darren Barty, Professor of Communication Studies here, Andrew Piper, Professor of German Studies, also at McGill, and Joanna Zielinska, Professor of Media Studies at Goldsmiths. Over a wide-ranging and engaging conversation, we talked about the becoming and evolution of the global university. The discussion touched on the limits of technology within university teaching, the political constituencies behind genuine curricular change, but we were very slow in getting to the question of humanities. So I found and asked everyone present directly, what about the humanities? Why has no one mentioned it yet? I found it strange. And Andrew Piper replied, and he said that he was actually avoiding the use of the term the humanities intentionally, as a kind of strategy. He wanted the conversation to come about less at a disciplinary level, or even a faculty level. Rather, as he put it, and I'll quote from the transcript, quote, I want to investigate some of the common modes under which we all work at the university. These are quite different in relation to the larger social context within which we find ourselves. I want to argue for the status of that difference in order to suggest ways in which these common modes could then be reintegrated with one another in terms of value. Again, as I see it, the value of inquiry broadly understood. End quote. For me, this brings to mind an instance of a performance of precisely this sort of inquiry. We all no doubt have those flagship lectures in our memories, ones that made us sit up, listen differently, and get curious. The lecture I have in mind took place in the fall of 2010 here at McGill, and was delivered by Krista Thompson, a professor of art history at Northwestern. For the requisite 50 minutes, Thompson spoke about street photography in New Orleans in the early 2000s. Photographers, usually around festivals such as Mardi Gras, would set up makeshift studios on the street, incorporating elaborately spray-painted canvas backdrops, called drops, depicting landscapes of leisure or high-end consumer goods common to hip-hop culture. Thompson showed countless photos of African-American teens posing with their friends in front of the spray-painted Bentleys and general etherealness of bling. That is a culture manifesting itself in an actual aesthetic light, as she argued. She made the case that being seen, the practice of taking the photograph itself, was, especially for the posing subjects, more important than the physical image. It was about becoming visible within a given representational and actual economy, with inquiry leading the way. While this is simply one example amongst many of the sorts of crossings that can take place in the humanities, and I don't mean it to be programmatic in the least, Thompson's work shows how political economies of art, representations of race and class, and formal analysis of the most shallow elements, surface, can all coincide to not only shed light, but read through this light what material social margins inhabit one version of the human, both within and across the field of agency of the humanities. And I look forward to the discussion.
Our first speaker then is Kevin Droz, who's a first-year master's student in the Department of English. His undergraduate coursework and honors thesis focused on high modernist fiction, especially that of James Joyce and Virginia Woolf. But his current master's research deals primarily with the later modernist writings of Elizabeth Bowen, Rebecca West, and Rose McCauley. He's particularly interested in technology and citizenship in post-war British fiction.
So I chose to focus on not on writers within the academy writing about the academy, but on more informal channels of communication and discussion. So I found a lot of great information just from reading newspaper articles, comments online, Reddit threads, people's WordPress accounts, just to see what people are saying about this. So, on 24 February 2009, Patricia Cohen published a hotly contested article in the New York Times that sparked a series of diatribes against and staunch defenses of the humanities. Cohen's article, entitled "In Tough Times, the Humanities Must Justify Their Worth," begins by framing what she says is a common conception of the institutionalized study of the humanities in North American universities. The critical thinking, civic and historical knowledge, and ethical reasoning that the humanities develop have a different purpose. She says, quote, "They are prerequisites for personal growth and participation in a free democracy, regardless of career choice." She stresses an apparent distinction between the study of the humanities and that of professional programs that prepare students for direct entry into the labor force. Citing changes in the funding allotted to arts and humanities programs in post-secondary institutions, Cohen insists that the humanities are under great pressure to justify their existence to administrators, to policymakers, to students, and perhaps the more daunting one, to parents. Richard M. Freeland, the Massachusetts Commission of Higher Education, makes an appearance in Cohen's article. He chimes in, arguing both that the humanities tend to focus entirely on personal intellectual development and, quote, "that we've created a disjunction between the liberal arts and our roles as citizens and professionals." So these two writers conceive of a neat division between the murky benefits of a liberal arts education and the job opportunities available to graduates of professional programs. Yet by scouring the comments that Cohen's article generated online, we can see a spate of citizens, students, professors, employees, and employers treating the humanities, the professional programs, and the natural sciences not as rigidly opposed fields of study, but instead as vital components of a common intellectual tradition. John Stuckey, a California resident, wrote that education and applied sciences is invaluable, but not without each individual also having a strong background in our shared human culture. Encouraged by the freedom and anonymity of an online forum, many people posting to the New York Times expressed a similar interest in reframing the debate about humanities education in less resolute terms. terms, that is, that do not depict the student's decision-making process as a sort of tug of war between social and economic pressures on the one hand, and the desire on the part of the student to pursue humanities study on the other. But before I continue in this informal talk, I think that it would be good to restate some of the usual complaints levied against the humanities, which popped up online, and some of the usual responses to these charges. So the usual complaints include what practical good are such disciplines? This has already been touched upon. How will they get good jobs? How are they economically relevant? And how does academic work benefit the public at large? So we can already see an emerging pattern just from four of those. And then some of the usual responses that pop up are the humanities cultivate understandings of other cultures. They enable students to develop strong communication and critical thinking skills. They stress creative thinking, and that they encourage ethical decision-making, which in turn fosters sympathy and empathy in our dealings with other people. So supporters of this final point often draw on a study published in the journal Science in fall of 2013. The Guardian picked up the story on the 8th of October and ran the headline, "Reading Literary Fiction Improves Empathy." The article notes that reading a good book makes you better able to connect with your fellow human beings. The New Yorker and Scientific American published similar accounts of the same article. And again, the list goes on. Even from this cursory list of remarks and rejoinders, we can see how these narrow lines of inquiry relegate what should be an interdisciplinary, multivocal debate on the status of post-secondary education to a single point of contention: what is useful or defensible in a time during which some people seem to measure the value of their education by their immediate job prospects. That is, by the immediate economic and financial returns on their 3 or 4 or 5 years of study. In The Rise and Fall of the English Major, which was published in the New York Times on the 22nd of July of last year, Berlin Klinkenberg dubs this orientation towards humanistic study as a new, she calls it, quote, vocational emphasis in the way students and their parents think about what to study in college. She continues by suggesting that the rush to make education pay off presupposes that only the most immediately applicable skills are worth knowing. In 2013, as well, the American Academy of Arts and Sciences commissioned an extensive 92-page report that seeks to combat this type of thinking. They write that in a time when economic anxiety is driving the public toward a narrow concept of education focused on short-term payoffs, it's imperative that universities and their supporters make a clear and convincing case for the value of liberal arts education. The report concludes that a fully balanced curriculum, one that includes the humanities, social sciences, and natural sciences, quote, provides opportunities for integrative thinking and imagination, for creativity and discovery, for good citizenship. But I think it's also important to acknowledge some of the dissenting voices here as well. So a professor at an American university writing under the pseudonym Thomas H. Benton started a column in 2013 called "So You Want to Go to Grad School," in which he tries to discourage students from considering graduate studies in the humanities. This type of thought comes to a head in Karen Kelsky's iconoclastic take on the humanities degree, especially at the graduate level. She's a former tenured professor at the University of Illinois and the University of Indiana, and she runs a webpage entitled "The Professor is In," which she seeks to dispel what she thinks as rosy-colored views of academic life. She bluntly writes, "Postgraduate study, quote, yields nothing in the end but devastating opportunity costs." She keeps an open Google Doc on which recent graduate and postgraduate students can post their what they studied, what their job prospects are, and what their total accumulated debt is. So when I was there was over 750 people who responded to it in different capacities, and the average was between $20,000 and $40,000, depending on the student. Ironically, she now serves as a consultant for students entering and leaving the graduate programs. She did an interview with Slate magazine on the 15th of January this year, if anyone's interested. But regardless of these dissenting voices and the apparent emphasis on vocational learning, Students are still flocking to humanities courses, both at the graduate level and at the undergraduate level. Responding to Klinkenberg's article on the death of the English major, Randy Malamud, an Atlanta resident, quipped that the reports of our death are exaggerated, referring, of course, to Mark Twain's famously wry remark in the New York Journal, in which Twain, notifying readers that he was neither dead nor deadly ill, wrote that the report of my death was an exaggeration. And in another letter to the editor that applies to the death of the English major, a Boston resident, Joshua Peterson, suggests that we don't need a few more students to be English majors. We need every student to think more like a humanist. So Peterson points to an emerging trend in online discussions of the humanities, the desire on the part of many to speak of the humanities as ingredients of a wide-ranging education and not as one of 3 possible paths that you can take that are marked out in contradistinction to something like the natural sciences. In a similar vein, a Reddit user wrote that the single most useful element of the humanities degree is that there's no way that you can memorize yourself to an A, highlighting an approach to post-secondary education that fosters, transferable, our favorite buzzword, critical thinking skills in a wide range of disciplines. The University College London Centre for Digital Humanities put it in a similar way as they tried to trumpet the value of liberal arts education, and they said that humanistic study is not formulaic. It is not learning by rote. It is as dynamic and enthralling and multifaceted as the world in which we live. So another trend that emerges is one that relies not on crisply argued accounts of the benefits of studying the humanities, which tend to fall into one of the, I listed 4 camps as the usual defenses, but instead on kind of like appeals to feeling. So in Why Teach English, published in the New Yorker on 27 August last year, Adam Gopnik mounts a defense of literary study that is less syllogistic and orderly than it is commonsensical. He writes, quote, "Some people like to talk about books so much that they want to spend their lives talking about books to people who listen to them talk about books." I fall into this category, as do a lot of us here. But the thrust of Gopnik's argument holds without reference to a specific discipline. Some people love art history or philosophy and Aristotle so much that they're willing to devote their lives to talking about Aristotle to people who are willing to listen to them, or whatever enthusiastic ramblings on the subject we might have. Gopnik concludes his defense by claiming that, quote, "The reason we need the humanities is because we're human. That's enough." In the first instance, the choice to end an article that makes a case for the value of humanistic study by asserting that the worth of these disciplines is self-evident appears odd, but it does resonate with one of the conclusions of the report issued through the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, which states that we must recognize that all disciplines are essential for the inventiveness, competitiveness, security, and personal fulfillment of the public. So I'd like to conclude by framing this talk in terms of Gertrude's question to the Danish prince in Hamlet. The queen asks her son, "Why seems it so particular with thee?" And here Gertrude nicely captures the experience of scholars and students working and learning in the humanities. Though we recognize that we are far from the first generation of thinkers to approach a text, a crux, a concept, or a particular ethical or aesthetic problem, we nonetheless respond to and write of it as an experience that is uniquely our own. Nick Mount, who's an English professor at the University of Toronto, suggests in part of a series of interesting 2-minute videos that the value of the humanities is or should be the one time in your life that you get to do something because you're curious, because you're interested in it, because you want to, and because you simply can't see yourself doing anything else. So I hear an echo of why seems it so particular with the Mount's formulation. And so next time I'm asked why the humanities matter to me, I'll think of Hamlet, of Mount, and of Kurt Vonnegut, who, in a 2005 essay collection, Man Without a Country, offered a playful defense of the value of an arts and humanities education. Quote, "Go into the arts," he urges. "I'm not kidding. The arts are not a way to make a living. They're a very human way of making life more bearable." Thank you.
Learn with humanities education, even if you're in philosophy, is that if you want to clinch an argument, you always turn to Shakespeare. There's always something there that you use. So out many of the things we started talking about last week, but I think it was pushing us forward in interesting ways. I don't know if anyone in the audience wants to start, or any of the speakers.